Hi, welcome to another edition of Chattin' with Jeanine. I'm Jeanine Nodder. My co-host tonight is Bill McNally from the show America's Future, taped in Windham, New Hampshire. Hi, Bill.
Hi, nice to be here, Jeanine.
Thanks for joining me. Our distinguished guest tonight is Mr. John McManus, who is the publisher of the New American magazine, where I had one of my very first articles published in June of 1990 on the POW issue. Mr. McManus is also the president of the John Birch Society and the author of several books. Mr. McManus, welcome to Merrimack.
Thank you very much.
I heard you were on CNN a few weeks ago.
I was, yeah. I had 13 minutes of fame.
Well, I'm very honored that you're
13 seconds,
here.
excuse me.
13
I was
seconds.
at a press conference, and Lou Dobbs, his news hour, they had a TV camera there, and we were talking about the same kind of thing that he's been talking about, that the immigration problem in the North American Union is being planned and so forth. So when Lou wanted to get onto that subject again, they took a snippet out of what I was saying and a snippet about it, one of our speakers was saying, and put it on the air. It was very good. We're pleased about that.
Well, let's start with illegal immigration. Do you think the Bush administration wants to stop illegal immigration?
They can't. It's an absolute contradiction. Mr. Bush even made a speech last May where he said that he was going to do this and this and this. He's going to put electronic surveillance and beef up the Border Patrol and everything else. But he was already committed to the Security and Prosperity Partnership. And most Americans have not even heard of that, right? And when you say that, Security, Prosperity, Partnership, doesn't that sound nice? You know, it's very comforting, right? What is it? It's a plan to do away with the borders separating the United States, Canada, and Mexico. And Mr. Bush is committed to this. They met, he and the Prime Minister of Canada and Vicente Fox, the President of Mexico, met in Waco, Texas in March of 2005, and again in March of 2006. Now they had a new Canadian leader. They changed leaders. But they're still committed to this thing. The Security and Prosperity Partnership is leading to what is called the North American Union, which is something a lot of Americans haven't heard about as well. Mm-hmm. And that means to do away with the borders. We're going to have a duplication of the European Union that has swallowed up the sovereignty of 25 nations. We're going to have it here with the North American Union, and then they plan to expand it to Central America and South America and do away with sovereignty.
That's very alarming.
And Mr. Bush will posture as being somebody who wants to do something about the border. Well, he could do something about the border. In fact, if you go to the old document that most Americans have heard about and never read, I've got a copy of it here somewhere. It's called the Constitution of the United States. Right?
I've heard of that.
You've heard of that, right. Well, we go to, there's a lot of here is authorization to do some things. But if you go to Article 4, Section 4, you find that here is something that the President and the Congress are required to do. What is it? The United States shall guarantee to every state in the Union a republican form of government and shall protect each of them from invasion. Now, they didn't say military invasion. The job of the President and the Congress is to protect the nation from an invasion. Now, we have somewhere between 11 and 20 million illegal immigrants to our country. If that's not an invasion, I don't know what the word means.
Mr. McManus, didn't President Bush give a speech last year where he was spelling out what he was going to do?
That's right. That's May 15th he gave that speech. And in that speech, he said he was going to do this and this and this and this. It was all very comforting. And he had to do that because all these demonstrations had occurred. Big parades in Los Angeles, Chicago, New York, all the illegal immigrants going out there, trashing the American flag and demanding their rights as if they had rights. They don't have any rights here in America. They're Mexicans. Go back home. So Mr. Bush finally said, well, I better address this because there's a lot of Americans got upset when they saw all these parades on television. So May 15th, he gave that speech. It had to be one of the most dishonest performances by a president of the United States in the history of our country, because he's already committed to abolishing the borders with the Security and Prosperity Partnership that's leading to this North American Union.
Now, this Security and Prosperity Partnership, is this leading to something even worse for our nation?
It's leading to the North American Union, yeah. As I mentioned, the North American Union is already being discussed. In fact, September 12th through 14th, there was a highly secret meeting held in Banff, Canada. BANFF, big resort community. They went to a plush hotel. Leaders from the United States, from Mexico, and from Canada, they got there for the purpose of doing what? For the purpose of discussing how we're going to progress to get to this North American Union. Right? So who was there representing the United States? Donald Rumsfeld was there. You would think that he has a little concern about what was going on over in Iraq. Well, he's not the Secretary of Defense anymore, but he was at the time. George Shultz is the co-chairman of this. He used to be Secretary of State for the United States. Robert Pastor was there. Carla Hills. Carla Hills was the trade representative that started NAFTA. She was the one, she was practically the author of the NAFTA agreement. What has NAFTA done? Oh, it's only cost about 1 million Americans their jobs. Right? Factories moving to Mexico and so forth. They had James Woolsey, was a former head of the CIA, James Schlesinger, a former cabinet officer, William Perry, and then there was a reporter there from the Wall Street Journal, the one who writes on Latin American stuff all the time, Mary Anastasia O'Grady, and she writes about Latin America all the time. Has she written about this secret meeting she went to? No. No.
Can you, Mr. McManus, can you kind of give a definition of this? They call it the SPP. There's a site I know that's called www.spp.gov, right?
That's the Security and Prosperity Partnership.
And what is that exactly?
Exactly a pact that was entered into in March of 2005 by Bush, Vicente Fox, and Harper from Canada. And the purpose of that was to start the process rolling towards dissolving the sovereignty of all three nations and doing away with the borders, much the same as they've already done in Europe. You know, anybody from any of the 25 nations in the European Union now can go anywhere he wants within those. You don't have to show any, you don't have to passports, no border fences or anything like that. And it's having quite an impact. And the people over in Europe are beginning to say, we made a mistake. We shouldn't have done this. We shouldn't have gotten involved in this. But they did. And they even have, you know, over in Europe, they have the euros, the new money, right? There are a couple of countries that still haven't adopted the euros. But what has been proposed for our country and Mexico and Canada? A new kind of currency called the Amero, A-M-E-R-O. They've already proposed that.
Yeah.
So
Okay.
if I went to Europe, I couldn't spend any of this money? I have lira, marks,
You'd have to try and change it in, but I guess they're not changing it to euros anymore. You had to do that for a period of time. The British money is still the pound sterling, right? They haven't yet been sucked into that part of it, but they will be. They'll be forced to do it. They've already joined the European Union. The European Union will dictate to them what they have to do. So we're moving very closely and more towards a situation where we're not going to have a country anymore. Here's a report of an independent task force, right? Building a North American community, right? Who published this? The Council on Foreign Relations. All right? Who's the author of this? Who's the guru behind it? A man named Robert Pastor. He's a professor at Columbia University. No, he's not there anymore. He's at American University in Washington. And he's a prominent leftist, a man who's been involved in the international stuff all the time. He doesn't give a whit about sovereignty of the United States. So he got together with some Mexicans and some Canadians, and they put this thing together. Council on Foreign Relations behind it. The Council on Foreign Relations, of course, is the organization that wants to do away with our sovereignty, and they've been working at it for longer than I've been alive.
Long, long time.
Long time.
So this Robert Pastor is ahead of the trade negotiations?
No, he's the most important individual. He's written some of the stuff that they're after, and he's one of the gurus of this Building a North American report and so on. He's a guy that put out a book a couple of years ago, Toward a North American Community. And the subtitle of it is Lessons from the Old World for the New. All right, what are the lessons from the old world? The European Union. The lessons from the old world for the new. We've got to duplicate. Vicente Fox, in 2002, he made a speech, and in his speech he said, what we want to do is to form an ensemble of nations that will duplicate what the European Union has done for Europe. He actually said that. Now, Mr. Bush hasn't been as explicit as that, but he's working very closely and working towards it and so forth. So where are we? Well, we're at a point where the independence of the United States is up for grabs. These people mean to do away with the sovereignty of the United States. They have no intention of blocking the border. They have no intention of obeying the Constitution they've all sworn an oath to. They intend to have our nation merged with Canada and with Mexico, preparatory to then the whole Western Hemisphere. All right, you get the Western Hemisphere into a North American Union and then a Western Hemisphere Union. You have the European Union, then you have the trade agreements in Africa and the trade agreements in the, and all of these things steer towards the United Nations. And that's the final nail in the coffin. The United Nations will dominate everybody. That's exactly what's going on. And most Americans don't know about it. I had a friend over in Maine recently, and he told me he met with a senator, one of the female senators over there. And she knew him, and she's known him for a long time, called him by his first name. And so he says to her, he says, tell me, what do you know about the North American Union? She said, what's that? What's that? Right? So we even have to educate some congressmen and some senators about this. Right?
Interesting.
It's frightening.
Is there any connection here between this so-called NAFTA superhighway, or with this union that's taking place?
I saw a picture of that. It's like a quarter-mile wide, and it runs from Mexico all the way to Canada.
Here it is. This is our New American magazine. The whole subject is the North American Union, all right? And it's a report about that, all right? And I think the camera can probably see this. Here is a map, and it goes from southern Mexico all through the United States right up into Canada.
So it's not just one highway.
Right.
There's several of them.
The intention here is to have goods coming from the West Coast to be dropped off at ports in southern Mexico. And then they will be either railed or trucked up into the United States. The first port of entry in the United States will be Kansas City. That's a long way from the Mexican border. Right? Mm-hmm. And what has happened, this is interesting too, is that some of the longshoremen's unions and the Teamsters unions have found out about this. And so they're very strongly opposing this. Because if this works the way they plan, the jobs of the West Coast stevedores and the West Coast truckers will be gone. It'll be all Mexicans. Right? So this is already underway, and they expect to start building this through Texas in the year 2007.
And all the people that live in the way, they're just taking
Well,
their
they're going to
homes?
take all their homes by eminent domain. It's going to be millions of acres and billions of dollars. And one of the ways they're going to finance this is that roads that are already paid for down in Texas, they're going to put up toll booths. So the people are going to have to pay the tolls to build their undoing. It's wrong.
Where does somebody go to read up on that?
Well, the best place to go is
website?
the best place to go is to get the magazine. I'm the publisher,
Yeah.
the New American.
You have a website?
Yep, the website is thenewamerican.com, or you can go to
Or
the.
they can email me too.
You can go to the John Birch Society, jbs.org, and you can order a copy of this magazine. The whole magazine, this issue is only about a month old. All the articles in it are about this plan, who's behind it, how it developed, where it's going, and so forth. So I even wrote an article in here about. So.
You want to ask the next question? I'm lost on my sheet.
No, I was just going to say the North American Union. How does this compare, let's say, with the European Union?
Well, very much. What they intend is exactly the same. Now, anybody who's looked into the European Union would know that it started off as a trade agreement. It went from a coal and steel community of 6 nations. Then it went to the European Common Market, and then the European Union. Now, I have a letter from a small political party in England, and they said it was sold to the English people as a trade agreement and has become a political union which is changing our laws and traditions. Right? That's pretty obvious. And that's exactly what they plan here. Changing our laws and traditions. What's going to happen to this Constitution of the United States? Well, they're not obeying it anyway, so they'll put it in the bottom drawer and forget about it. What has happened in Europe is that the European Union now has a constitution. And the constitution has been given to the different countries. Most of the countries have ratified it. Happily, Denmark and France, the voters there said no. And so the leaders of it said, well, we're going to implement it piecemeal if we can't get it now. But you go to that European Union constitution, and what do you find? you find it says right at the beginning that this shall have precedence over the laws of the member states. Goodbye sovereignty. You look a little bit deeper into it, and what do you see? That the European Union, the Constitution, shall be in accordance with the United Nations, shall respect the United Nations Charter, shall this, shall that. There's about 5 or 6 different places in it where it says it is subservient to the United Nations, which is what I said before. All of this is leading toward world government. And these are the steps on the way. The European unions, the trade agreements, the North American Union as being planned. Now, George Bush is behind this, and most people say, George Bush, he's a conservative, isn't he? My goodness, he's a conservative.
He's pro-life, which got him elected.
Well, you know, you can go back and look into George Bush's run-up to become president. He was governor of Texas. Go back to April of 1998. Okay, that's 2.5 years before he won his first election. Right? The election was in November of 2000. You may recall it took a while before they finally decided he'd won. Okay, so go back to April of 1998. And what do you find? You find a meeting at the home of George Shultz in Palo Alto, California. I mentioned George Shultz a little while ago. He was the co-chairman of this big deal up in Canada, this secret meeting, all right? So at the meeting, who's present? Well, George Bush is there. He's now the governor of Texas. But this is April of '98, all right? George Shultz's home. Who's there? Cheney, Condoleezza Rice, Paul Wolfowitz, several other people who became big officials of the Bush administration. And they boasted that the purpose of the meeting was to form a brain trust to train George Bush to be president of the United States. They started in April of '98. They kept it up with seminars and fax machines and conference calls and so forth, some of them in some of the meetings held in Austin, Texas, where he was governor. Right? And after 2 years of this training session going on, finally he wins the nomination for the Republican Party in the summer of 2000. And he turns to one of his brain trusters, Mr. Cheney, and he says, find me a vice president. And Cheney searched the country. He went from coast to coast. He went from Canada to Mexico. He searched the country and came up with Cheney. Okay? Now, I'm not making this up. All right? Was George Bush trained to be president by these people, all of whom are heavy into the Council on Foreign Relations, the World Government Organization? Yes, yes. Now, you may recall, let's see, it was back in January of this year, January of 2006, right after the first of the year, I think it was January 5th, and Mr. Bush gathered all of the past secretaries of defense and secretaries of treasury that he could find. And he gathered them for a meeting in the White House. Help me, tell me what I should do about what's going on in Iraq. Right? So they all got together and they had this big confab, and I think I have a picture of it here. Maybe I can find it quickly and show you. So what did they do? Well, they finally got together and, oh, I'm not going to find it. Anyhow, they took a great big picture. And here was George Bush in the center, and there were about 15 people to one side and 15 people to this, kind of like a semicircle, right? Former secretaries of state, former secretaries of defense, and the current secretaries of state and secretaries of defense. And every single person in the picture was a member of the Council on Foreign Relations, except President Bush.
How come we don't see this in the media?
You don't see this in the, well, actually the picture did appear, but it didn't tell you that everybody was a member of the Council on Foreign Relations. So is this the group that is dictating to the President of the United States how we are going to proceed, what we are going to do? So let's summarize, okay? Let's go back and summarize. The summary is very simple. They are not going to do anything about the border until they are forced to do so by Congress. They are not going to continue to preserve the sovereignty of the United States. They mean to get us involved in a North American Union, which is a duplicate of the European Union, where sovereignty has been washed away. And it's a big step on the way toward a world government that some of these people say, I'm going to run it.
You have an interesting poster there. Can you mention what that's about?
Well, this is the European Union. This is a poster that was put out by the European Union, and it was put out, 20 some odd years ago. And this is from the Council of Europe, which is a subsidiary of the European Union. And you see here, what it is a rebuilding of the Tower of Babel. All right, now what's the significance of that?
Upside down stars.
Well, the upside down stars are part of it. Yeah, that's right. All right, but here's supposedly rebuild. You can see the workmen. I don't know. I hope the camera can pick it up. You can see the workmen in the picture. You can see a crane. They're rebuilding the Tower of Babel.
There's the crane.
All right, now what's the significance of that? The significance is very simple. Where did nationhood begin? It began at the Tower of Babel. Right? Read the scripture. It's in Genesis. You read the scripture in Genesis, what do you see? Well, you see that there were people building this, and they were going to challenge God. They were going to build a world government and everything else, and God came down and confused the tongues. So a lot of people couldn't speak to each other, and the ones who could speak to each other went off here, and they built a nation. One's here, another nation, another one over here. It's very clear. And so when you're saying you want to rebuild the Tower of Babel, you're shaking your fist at the sky and saying, not thy will, but mine be done. My point is this. Nationhood is a good thing. World government is not a good thing. And we know that from the book of Genesis and what happened at Babel. That they would publish a poster where they're saying they're going to rebuild the Tower of Babel is hugely significant.
And scary.
And scary, right. So there's a spiritual element in this. But again, go back, where are we? The United States as a sovereign, independent nation is going to be dissolved by these people. Now, why is the United States so important? Well, you go back, my little book here has the Constitution, but it also has the Declaration of Independence. And there you find the definition of our country. Men are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights. Where do you find that elsewhere? What other country says that? Right? There is a God. He gave us our rights. We form a government, they said, to secure these rights. We formed a government. Everything's in its proper order. No other country can boast that. Right? So are we willing to sacrifice that? There's the nuts and there's the Declaration is the philosophical base of the country. The Constitution is the nuts and bolts. How do you run the country? And what it says is government shall only have this power, this power, this power, and that's all.
So, Mr. McManus, what should Americans do to protect the independence of the United States?
First thing you got to do is you got to understand that your country is worth preserving. They're not teaching that in the schools. They've made it impossible to teach the Declaration of Independence in the schools. If you can't teach that there's a Creator who gave us our rights, you can't teach what's in the Declaration of Independence. All right. So the first thing you got to do is realize what the country's all about. Second thing you got to do is get yourself informed about the threats and then understand which congressmen, which senators, which presidents are in favor of this treachery and which ones aren't. And then if your congressmen and your senators are not in favor of it, then get new ones.
What about the model resolutions for the, don't you have a model resolution that you're trying to get introduced to the?
Well, we have. There's a piece of legislation, it's called H. Con. Res. 487, and the purpose of this is to express the sense of Congress that the United States shall not engage in the construction of this superhighway starting through Texas and up into, and shall not enter into a North American Union. Some congressmen are wise to this.
487. So we should be calling our congressman.
H. Con. Res. 487. And if you can get your congressman or your congressman-elect, that would be helpful.
Now, I know there is a representative from New Hampshire who has introduced legislation or a bill into the New Hampshire legislature. He wants to basically say the same thing. He wants to send a message to Congress.
That's in your state legislature.
In our state legislature here.
Well, that's a good place to start. And if your state legislature comes out with that, then the two you have here in New Hampshire who go to Washington, the two senators and the two congressmen, they'll pay attention. You say the people in New Hampshire are waking up. What, live free or die? You've got to change that. You've got to have live free or be part of a world government. That's what they're aiming towards. All right? Now, I don't know what. I know that you have two new congressmen coming in. Both of your incumbents were defeated. All right. You know, there are people who say to me, look, Republicans are always better than Democrats. No, that's not so. In fact, the leadership of both parties is controlled by the same powerful influences here that are bad. And any congressman who's in there, his sole goal almost entirely, almost right across the board, 435, the sole goal is to stay in office. Right? And if they find out that the people back home want no more of this, no more of this, and let's get back to basics, let's get back to the Constitution and so forth, then that's what they'll do. They want to stay in office. So there is hope. There is hope, yeah. We can still have our country and keep our country and so forth.
We're about out of time, Mr. McManus. Any parting words for the viewers?
Well, wake the town and tell the people, that's the job. jbs.org or thenewamerican.com. People should write in and get a copy of this magazine. They could probably contact you and you could help them get a copy. It's all here. And we have just distributed a copy of this to every office in the Congress, all congressmen, all senators. It's being sent to all state legislators, all 50 states. It's being sent to sheriffs and police chiefs. We're now getting some help from some of the labor unions that are getting involved in this. And we mean to stop it, but we need help, obviously.
Good.
All right. Well, Mr. McManus, thank you so much for being on the show tonight.
My pleasure.
And Bill, thank you for helping me out again.
You're welcome.
And thank you, Channel 22, and you, the viewers, for watching. If you have any questions or concerns, you can email me at chattinwithjeanine@yahoo.com. And I hope you'll stay tuned and watch the show some more, because you never know what to expect. Next week, I have 5-time Golden Glove champion Mike Mercier. He'll be here at 2 of the Boxers he's currently training. It'll be a fun show. See you then. Ow.